Good morning, DSST, ladies and gentlemen. It is excellent to see you today. I'm very excited to be here with Miss Bess.
Mr. Even, long time no see. Happy to be back in the morning meeting space with you.
I know there's no debate today, but we'll have to do that again in the future. Instead, today we are closing out Latinx Heritage Month, and I'm very excited today. We have a really wonderful interview with Marissa Molina, and who's actually a good friend of Miss Bess's.
Yeah, so I'm going to introduce her a little bit and say all the important things you need to know about her. The first one being I first met Marissa when we were working on immigration policy reform together. She taught Spanish at GVR, at DSST GVR, for 2 years before following her passion for advocacy. Currently, she serves as the Colorado State Immigration Manager for Forward.us, which is a really big deal. And even bigger of a deal is that she was recently appointed by Governor Polis to serve as the first Dreamer on Metro State's Board of Trustees. So she is a fierce advocate, an inspirational leader, and a magnificent friend. And I'm so excited for you all to see this interview with her today.
And what's so wonderful about this is that our students did a spectacular job interviewing Miss Molina today, and I'm very proud of them. So let's go ahead and take a look.
So hi, my name is David Molina. I'm a senior here at DSST.
Hey Marissa, I'm Antonio Morales. I'm a senior too. It's good to be talking to you today.
Hi Marissa, I'm Aliana and I'm a junior here at DSST.
Hi, I'm Marissa and I'm also a junior here at DSST.
And so thank you so much for being here, and we would like to learn more about you. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the invitation to participate in this conversation. My name is Marissa Molina. Currently, I'm the Colorado State Director for an organization, a bipartisan political advocacy organization called Forward US. I've been doing work with them for the last 2 years, but in my past, I was also a DSST teacher. I taught Spanish at DSST GVR High School. And I tell people that being a teacher and teaching changed my life. And I owe a lot of the power and the strength that I have to do the advocacy work that I do now to the really amazing young people that I taught at DSST. So I grew up in Western Colorado in a small town called Glenwood Springs, and I grew up undocumented. I came to the US at the age of 9 with my family. And, like many, many, many other families, my family came here looking for that American dream, looking to give me the types of opportunities that my parents didn't have access to in Mexico. And determined, and I came here with the goal of going to college, and I was just laser focused on that. And I grew up knowing I was undocumented, but not necessarily understanding what that meant and what that meant for the barriers that I would face. And so really, when I got to high school, I started to understand and see that a little bit more. I have an older sister who's really smart and really struggled to be able to access educational opportunities because of her undocumented status. And I really wanted to be this perfect student because I was like, I'm going to get all A's. I'm going to be really active in my community, and I'm going to get a full ride to college. And that's just not how it worked for me. Living in rural Colorado, there weren't a lot of people in 2010 who understood immigration the way that many teachers and educators do so now. And so, I didn't have a lot of access to resources, but I had this wonderful college counselor who said, Marissa, I have no clue how to help you get to college, but I'm going to be by your side all the questions. And so it really was him and that support he offered me that allowed me to go to college. And I attended Fort Lewis College down in Southwest Colorado, and I studied political science and economics. And I did so, I went to study political science because in my mind, I was like, if only I understand how government works, then I can change government to work for the people in my community who I see being impacted. There was a moment in time when my dad, my dad was driving without a driver's license. He was on his way to work. He got pulled over, and because he didn't have a Colorado driver's license, my dad was arrested. And I think about that moment, right? That image of walking into the jail to bail out my dad and feeling this incredible sense of shame and pain, to watch the man that is like, you know, all the strength of my family is my dad. And so to watch him, you know, be in jail simply because he had decided to go to work to try to put food on the table and provide for us was really painful for me. And that for me was what really was a turning point of saying, like, I need to do something so that this never happens again to somebody like me, to kids like me. And so that's why I decided to become a teacher too, right? Because I had so many wonderful educators who were there for me, who showed up for me. And I really believe that I wanted to pay it forward, that I wanted to be that person for my students. And I was not open about sharing my story of being undocumented until I met my students, until I shared with them during my class a little bit about my story. And my students gave me so much strength, right? Because after I shared really openly about my story, my students came to me and said, hey, Miss, like, here's my story. Here's the story of my parents. And what it helped me understand was that when we walk into our story, when we have this about where we come from, we're giving other people an opportunity to do the same. And so I often think about the promises I made them to always fight for our community. And that is the reason why I decided to go into immigration advocacy work, because I wanted to honor the promise I made to them, that I was going to fight and that I was going to ensure to the best that I could, right, that our families were going to be safe. And this was an opportunity for me to be able to provide that and to be able to say to my students, you know, I told you that you had to be the change you wanted to see in the world, but I can't ask you to do something I'm not willing to do myself. So I have an incredible amount of respect for young people like you all, because I, like, if people like you changed my life, right? Imagine what you all can do. So again, thanks so much for having me for this conversation.
Thank you for sharing that about yourself and about your story. And to start off, I want to ask, why is MSU student population of the Latinx community not reflected of the actual population of Denver? And what can we do to help increase the number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been on the board of MSU Denver for the last year and a half. And Metro State University serves as an open access institution, meaning that any student that wants to come to us, we want to take in students, right? And it's an institution that provides so many really amazing opportunities for students, not only to go to college, but then to get connected to career resources and pathways after college. You know, I think that one of the reasons why the student population at Metro is not reflective of the city of Denver is the same reason that we see across the city, right? That our Latinx students are unfortunately not being supported in the same ways that other students are to get to college. The first step is to get accepted, but that's not the only step, right? We have to get kids there the first day of classes, and we have to keep kids staying there. And that often requires a lot of resources, right? I'm speaking kind of from my own experience and from that of knowing my students, but so many of my Latinx students, I taught Spanish for native speakers, so the majority of my students were Latinx. Their families had no experience with the college going process, right? And so parents would come to me and say, like, well, what does it mean to like apply to financial aid? And like, what do these loans mean? And what is FAFSA? Can I fill out FAFSA if I'm undocumented? And so I think that when we are unable to meet the needs of the Latinx population early on and be able to provide them like with the resources to get to college, that's why we see that, right? Like Metro is doing outreach to all of these places, but then ultimately it's like our students getting there. And I think a lot of students look at all the options that they have, and like if they have the option to go to like CU Boulder, they're going to want to do that versus Metro, right? Because if you're staying at Metro doesn't have dorms. And so I think that students often look for different college experiences. And so that's one issue. One issue is like resources and how families understand access to college. And I think like it's hard when you were in high school, and I think back about myself, right? Like my parents had no experience going to college. And so it's not like they could tell me, hey, going to a smaller college is better for you. Like knowing how you learn, it would be better for you to be in a class of 25 students versus 150, right? Like they didn't have that. They were just like, this is great. You're going to college and that's awesome. I'm really grateful I ended up at a small school because it gave me access to professors and opportunities I wouldn't otherwise. And I was kind of quiet. So it allowed me to grow into my voice. And so I think a lot of students dismiss MSU Denver as an opportunity and as a really valid opportunity for them to be able to access. They see it as like, oh, that's my last choice. But actually, like MSU is like one of the top universities when it comes to student engagement. It was the campus with the highest voter turnout in the entire state of Colorado in 2018. It received an award for that. We have top engineering programs, education programs, business programs. But I think oftentimes students are very dismissive of what MSU can provide for them because we're only talking about Ivy League schools and the CU Boulders of the world.
Thank you for that. This is kind of like a two-part question. So what are some opportunities outside of school for Latinx youth involvement? And how can we support our peers who may not have as much privilege, like who are undocumented and may not have as many resources?
Yeah, so for the first question, I would say look at your community and your neighborhood, and you're gonna find some opportunities, right? I know where Conservatory Green is, but I don't know where all the students might come from, right? But I think about the big effort right now that that folks in the far Northeast are putting together of ensuring that kids have opportunities to safely have fun, right? Because what we're seeing is like an increase in youth violence because of the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders and students not having as many places to go recreate that are safe. And so think about like what is happening in my community right now and what are those efforts that I can plug into. So for example, I live now close to Southwest Denver, and there's this really amazing food co-op called the Westwood Food Collaborative. And it helps people, gives people the opportunity to learn about farming and about healthy foods. And then it's been providing like pre-made meals for families who are struggling through the pandemic. And so thinking about like, what are those organizations that are in my community that are doing good work and how can I show up and volunteer? And I would also say, you know, like ask yourself, like, what am I really interested in doing? If you're really interested in sports, like how are organizations thinking about sports for students through the pandemic that we're living through, right? Like there's all these adjustments that have to be made. Or thinking through like, I really care about food access. So maybe you want to volunteer work with your local food pantry. Or maybe you are part of a local church and maybe there's opportunities there. So I would say like, ask yourself what your interests are and then look around in your own neighborhood to find opportunities that allow you to plug in. And now the second part, right? I love this question because I think that there's such power in young people supporting one another. I grew up feeling very alone and isolated in my experience being undocumented because oftentimes in my classroom, teachers would allow students to say words like illegal and alien, right? And it's like, that dehumanized me. I internalized being illegal because no one said, hey, that's actually not the word we should use. We use undocumented because a human being can't be illegal. And so I think thinking about like, what are the places that you can interrupt that messaging? How are you helping other people understand this issue? Because I so wish that I would have had peers in my class who I felt safe telling that I was undocumented, but also that would have said, you know what, I'm going to stand up for you. So I think thinking about that, and also oftentimes like people who are undocumented, it's hard for us to talk about that openly, even when we are safe with our friends. And so I think always sharing resources and information that you know can impact a lot of people, right? So it's not like, hey, I know you're undocumented, here are resources about know your rights. But it's like, I'm really excited that I get to share information about know your rights for the immigrant community. Like, would love if you help me like uplift this, right? I know I'm old, but like I do still am on TikTok, and I see so many videos on TikTok, right, where people are talking about being undocumented, and I'm like, that is an opportunity where, like, when people share their story, how can you be a good listener? How can you also ask, like, how can I show up for you differently? So I think there's a lot of power in showing up, but also sharing resources widely so that no one ever has to feel like they have to out themselves, even if they're not ready.
Okay, so I have two questions. So, my first question is, have you experienced discrimination during your time on the school board? And if so, how did you overcome it? And my second question is, like, what really made you transition from teaching to like wanting to be on the school board and politics?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the second question. I think the big thing that led to me wanting to seek a job in politics and in advocacy was the 2016 election. In the aftermath of the 2016 election, the first text messages that I received were for my students. And a lot of them were one saying like, hey, miss, are you safe? Are you going to be okay? And then some of my other students saying, hey, miss, like, I'm actually really worried about my family. And I wanted to have an answer for them because I wanted them to feel safe. And my answer in a lot of those conversations that I had after the election were, I'm gonna fight as hard as I can to make sure that we will be okay. I can't make a guarantee, but I can tell you that I'm not gonna ever stop fighting to ensure that. And I took that promise to my students really seriously. After I left teaching, I went to work, working actually with families in another charter network, but in the elementary school space. And what I kept seeing, right, is that even in that space, I had so many families who are being deeply impacted by immigration policy all the time. And I was like, what I'm seeing is like, I can send people to get resources, but often that's not enough. Because what I have always understood is that what needs to change is the policy that allows those injustices to happen to people. And so I started to get really involved in advocating and like sharing my story as a DACA recipient. DACA is the program that President Obama passed through an executive action, allowing undocumented youth to have protection from deportation and the ability to legally work in the US. And so I started to share my story. I started going to DC and sharing my story with members of Congress and saying, what are you going to do, right? After the Trump administration said that they were going to take away the DACA program, I went to DC several times and said, you know, what are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? And I found a lot of power in that. And I think I also started to realize, like, if I'm not the one pushing to write my own story, other people will. And I don't want that to happen. I am the author of my own story, and I believe that we all are. And so I'm going to actively write the story I want to be written about me and about DACA recipients. And the only way I get to do that is if I'm the one out there. So I had the opportunity to apply to work with this organization that I had volunteered for a long time. And now my role is focused on advocating for policies, not just at the federal level as it relates to immigration, but also working with other really amazing immigrant rights organizations like the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, the Colorado People's Alliance, right? These are all organizations locally that have been pushing for better state policies that increase access to opportunities for the undocumented community. So now I get to work with them, right? Like my first ever policy I worked on was a policy to allow more DMVs to give undocumented people licenses. Like that was a policy that led my dad to be in jail once, right? Like, so having the ability to be in the room with policymakers, to sit in front of a committee in the state house and say, this is the story of a kid who faced that. And now I'm here telling you the power of the immigrant community in the state of Colorado and why you should make this. That was such a cool moment for me, right? And getting to text my dad a picture of me in that committee hearing and being like, I'm here for you, right? Like I'm here making sure that people don't forget that the people who build our communities are people like you and people like my mom. So that's what really led me to that advocacy work. And then to the point about like facing discrimination, you know, I have faced some discrimination in every role I've had since I left college. And I think that has been the hardest thing that I've had to navigate. I'm a first generation immigrant college grad, right? And so a lot of navigating the professional world has been new to me, including like, how do you find a job? How do you write a cover letter and a resume? And, you know, there are people who are so connected, right? Like their friend's dad is the attorney who works with the attorney general, or like their dad worked with some fancy person who can help them get an internship. Like that was not my experience. And so I had to work a little harder, even as an educator, right? Like I taught at a moment in time when DSST GVR high school, I was the only Latinx teacher in a school where 56% of the student body was Latinx. My students had never had somebody that looked like them who taught them. And so that meant often, right, that when there were issues happening to the students that looked like me, they would say, Miss, like, you know, this substitute allowed the word illegal alien to be used by so-and-so, and like, can you help, right? So there were a lot of instances like that where I felt the burden to have to be teaching not just, you know, my students, but also teaching the adults around me that that we have to show up. It has happened in every single setting. And I would say that for me, one of the most rewarding parts about serving on the board of trustees of MSU Denver has been how incredible the people who sit on that board are. MSU Denver became the institution that fought for undocumented students to have access to in-state tuition in the state of Colorado. So when I went to college, I had to pay tuition as if I was an international student, even though I had graduated from a Colorado high school, because there was no in-state tuition. And MSU Denver and its board of trustees said, nope, we're gonna fight this. And they created like their own special tuition category. So they've always been at the forefront of this issue and fighting for this issue. So the folks that are currently serving on the board of trustees like know what DACA is. They have a deep sense of respect for our students and the circumstances that our students face, and they want to be responsive to that. So I've had a really great opportunity to sit in a space where I have felt really, really welcomed. What I would say is that it's not necessarily discrimination. What I have sensed is a lot of imposter syndrome. And I don't know how familiar you all are with that term, but imposter syndrome is this idea, right, that you sit in that space, but you don't feel like you're worthy of being there. You feel like you don't know enough. You know, I'm the youngest by far on that board. I probably have a whole lot less money than the majority of these really amazing, you know, community leaders. I've only been out in the professional world for the last 6 years. And so I'm like, I don't know, do I have the experience to sit here? Am I qualified to be here, right? So these doubts that come to me because I don't come from the same background that the majority of the people who sit there come from. And so I think that what I have found in this new role has been like, I'm fighting myself, right? I'm fighting myself to remind myself that I have a lived experience that allows me to come in with a different set of expertise than the majority of people who are on that board, right? Because I know what it's like to navigate college alone, to be an immigrant student, to have all these odds stacked against you to be able to get through college, right? So like, I might not have a giant checkbook to write a giant donation to the college, but what I do have is my time and my expertise. And so I'm working a lot of the time with the Immigrant Student Services Program at MSU Denver to say, okay, what do we need for our students? And what's been really awesome is that there's other trustees who have, right, all of this knowledge about raising funds and all of this. And so I will be doing some of the work directly with the students, and then they'll be bringing along all the right people to make sure we have the funds to be able to support our immigrant students. And so that has been like the biggest challenge for me, right? Is like, how do I remember that my voice, my expertise matters in that room, even if my expertise and even if my lived experience is so different than that of other people in the room. And I think that I have also faced that in all my different jobs, right? Of like, feeling like maybe I shouldn't be there, like I don't know enough. And sometimes people will, right, because they went to an Ivy League school, or because maybe like I have an accent, or when I started working with families in schools, right, one of the things I faced the most was that I think people would look at me and say like, you're 23 years old. You're really telling me that you can talk to parents better than me, who's been a principal for the last 5 years. And it's like, I'm not saying I'm better. I'm just saying I have a different set of skills, right? When I approach parents, I approach them in the same way I approach my own parents. And that gives a different opportunity, right? And I think understanding that culturally we have a lot to add, that allows us to be younger and really entrepreneurial in those spaces. But it is hard, and it is hard to fight yourself when you have those feelings.
Yeah. So your story is very impactful, you know. And I want to ask, what would you say to the Latinx communities? Not just I guess not just Latinx students, but in general, the Latinx community. And what policies should we create that will support the Latinx and undocumented communities?
Well, Antonio, that's a great question right now, because I think my biggest message to the Latinx community right now is to make sure that every single person in our community who's an eligible voter makes their voice heard in this year's election. This election is shaping up to be one of the most crucial elections in our lifetime, and the Latinx community has become one of the biggest voting blocs in this country, but often not the ones who vote the most, right? My parents are going to vote for the very first time, the first election they get to participate in. And, I have been reading this blue book, which tells you about the ballot initiatives in Colorado. And I have been helping my parents understand what their ballot will say. But I think the most important thing right now is like, we have to wake up to the power that exists within our community. We have been beaten down by the messages coming from all sorts of people, right? About who we are and what we have to contribute. And I think we have to realize that we are a community that is strong, that is diverse, that is entrepreneurial, and that we're resilient, right? And these are all really important things that we have to contribute to this country. And so, like, let's wake up to that power. Let's leverage the fact that, like, we Latinx people tend to have more small businesses than any other demographic, right? That's awesome. That means we're job creators. That means we're fueling the economy, right? Like, the Latinx community is diverse. We're not just Mexican, right? And so that diversity and experiences that also, I think, like, makes our community so vibrant. And I think I would love for young people like you all, right, to lead that kind of awakening of our community into our own power. And I think specifically because young people like you all have such a different perspective of the world than our own parents did, right? Like, I'm actively having conversations with my family about being anti-racist and what it means to have, and what the Black Lives Matter movement is, right? Like, these are issues that you all know, but that our families don't know as well. And so I see such a incredible role that you all young people can play in that. And I would say that when it comes to policies, right, that are impacting the Latinx community, there was a story this week that's really top of mind for me that was released in the Denver Post about the fact that Colorado is one of 3 states where Latinx people die at a higher rate than any other community. That is alarming, right? And the reason why that happens is because our community has limited access to healthcare. And so to me, I'm like, my dad is type 1 diabetic. My dad can't live without insulin. And so my dad having access to an insurance that allows people with pre-existing conditions to receive care is crucial. If our families don't feel like they can go to the doctor's office and be understood when they go, they're not going to go, right? That is why so many people in the Latinx community that get diagnosed with cancer get diagnosed so late in the game. And so I think about things like that. There's so many policies. And I think oftentimes politicians make the Latinx community be a single voting issue group, and it's not right. We're not just immigrants. Yes, some of us definitely are, and some of us are undocumented, and we should fix that. And we also have to fix education and education attainment for the Latinx community, healthcare access, right? there's all of these pieces that impact our community. And so I think we have to stop seeing the Latinx community as one that gets only impacted by one single issue.
Marissa, thank you so much. This has been an incredible interview. It's just been so much fun to watch, and just deeply grateful for you taking time out of your day to participate with us and our students.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the invitation. I love hanging out with young people, and teachers are awesome, and they deserve way more credit than they ever get. So please count me in as an ally in anything you do.